The big news from Abu Dhabi on Friday in the World Championship showdown is that it is pretty closely matched at the moment between Lando Norris in the McLaren and Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. We'll get onto that in a minute. Both of them looking good on light fuel and heavy fuel runs. Max has the advantage in top speed at the moment. It'll be interesting to see whether McLaren change that tomorrow. But the other big news was that Oscar Piastri had to sit out FP1, would you believe, in this, the most important race of his career so far. That's partly because inevitably the team does have to run by the regulations on 4 occasions a young driver, and obviously long before this came up as the finale, McLaren and presumably Oscar Piastri opted to do this in FP1. Now, on the face of it, there's quite a lot of logic there because FP1 in Abu Dhabi is run much earlier in the afternoon than FP3 qualifying or indeed the race. So there's not that much to be learnt in free practice 1. About 4 degrees difference in track temperature as it turned out. But the reality is, of course, that life can be very different. And Oscar Piastri, having come off that brilliant weekend in Qatar, which didn't result in a win, of course, but very, very fast, looking forward to continuing that momentum for the first time right in the sweet spot again in terms of his driving and getting the best from the car, suddenly had this abrupt halt to his momentum. Was there a solution to this? I don't know. For me, it would have been better for McLaren just to have taken some sort of penalty and not run Pato O'Ward in Oscar's car in FP1. That's what I would have done. I don't know how much the financial penalty was, but I think it would have been worth it in terms of not very often does a driver have a chance to go into the last race with a chance of winning the World Championship and with the momentum that Oscar has from Qatar. Now, whether there's more behind this decision, I guess we'll have to see. But the end result was that Oscar was actually a bit late out for FP2 as well. And whereas Lando Norris put in a really, really good lap on the soft tyre to be quickest in FP2, Oscar Piastri finished only 11th in FP2. That's not a great... I mean, in terms of learning about the car, they probably learned a bit about ride height, I would guess, from the Pato O'Ward run, but not much else. And Oscar getting into the car cold, he was pretty quick straight out of the box, as you would expect. I mean, he knows the circuit, he's done sim runs, etc. But the only encouraging thing was his second run on what was effectively then scrubbed softs, which was a 23.8, which Lando matched with a 23.4. So whereas he was 0.7 slower on the new tyres, about half a second slower on the scrub tyre. Not much consolation though. Tom Stallard saying, oh yeah, but you know, you did have a problem. I think it was at turn 6, so that's not a bad time on the scrub tyre. But in this, of all races, you shouldn't have to be trying to be encouraging to a driver like Oscar Piastri. It should be just wham, straight out there. Let's give this 100% to try and win this race and therefore the World Championship. But again, this reflects the situation in which McLaren find themselves, unable really to manage these 2 championship contenders going into this weekend. And as I say, almost unheard of, absolutely stupefying to see Oscar sitting on the pit wall on the radio in FP1 and actually yawning at the end of the session as well. I'm pretty sure he did find it quite boring as well. Roll on FP2 is probably all he was thinking. Anyway, having said all of that, let's have a look now at the McLaren and Red Bull runs. Max right on top of it from the start of FP1 going into FP2 as well. He was the first guy usually to get a quick time in on the soft tyre, and then in both sessions he was the first driver to switch to a fuel load and do runs with the hard tyre, and then in the second session the medium tyre. He did more laps with fuel in the car than anybody else today. He's got more information. There were no errors, no glitches. There were the usual little tweaks about how to improve the car here, a little bit of flap, what was it like, but no real criticism from Max over the radio in terms of the things we've seen before, like bouncing or lack of turn-in or lack of feel. It looks as if they're right there now, and they do have a significant top speed advantage, both with light fuel and heavy fuel. In light fuel, Max was doing 330 through the speed trap. Lando Norris 327 consistently. I mean, Lando quite quick, but I mean, that is a significant difference. And then in heavy fuel in the second session, FP2, obviously depends a little bit on the mode of engine mode they were running. Max around 311, 312, Lando Norris 305, 306. So the difference actually bigger on heavy fuel than it was on light fuel. Very similar in terms of lap time as well. Bearing in mind, Max was doing a much longer run and presumably had more fuel on board anyway at the beginning of the run. So yeah, very good day for both of them. It looks to be very quick. I would say at the moment the odds favour Lando Norris. When he did go out to do the 23.0, which made him quickest in the session, Max had already done a 23.4, and GP was on the radio saying, Max, do you want to have another go? What do you feel? Or do you think we should just quickly get in and do some homework with the medium tyre on fuel? And Max said, I don't think we can learn much more. As if, yeah, of course I can go quicker, but we're not going to gain much by doing that. That was the impression that I got from that little bit of conversation. So I think Max could have gone a little bit quicker. Don't read into that too much, that 0.4 difference. Max looking very good. I'm not saying that the Red Bull's as quick as a McLaren around here, but it's not a big difference. And Lando Norris on occasion looking quite ragged, particularly in FP1, quite a few moments locking up as well, running wide. Oscar looked pretty good in the McLaren, wasn't complaining too much, playing around with front flap when he did get out in the car. The car is a very quick car around here, there's no doubt. As Mark Slade was saying in the build-up to this, the McLaren Mercedes is the best package. But I think the surprising thing is how good the Red Bull is looking. George Russell right up there at the end of his soft tyre runs as well with Max, saying that he felt his car had picked up a little bit of feel with the change in wind direction. Classic George Russell comment, but basically matching Max's times and looking pretty good on fuel as well. So reasonably encouraging day for Mercedes, although Kimi Antonelli was not quite up to speed today and complaining of bouncing as well on the straight. But another big story really was what was going on with the likes of Oliver Behrman and the two Sauber Ferraris, and we can throw Esteban Ocon in there as well. All really quick today. In fact, Oliver Behrman completely blown away by how good his car felt. P4 for Haas-Ferrari, 23.5 on the soft tyre. Nico Hülkenberg, 23.5 as well. Gabriel Bortoleto matching that. And Isaac Hadjar only a little bit away, 23.6 in the Racing Bulls. So very, very tight midfield at the moment. Fernando Alonso, 23.7. But where are the Ferraris? Charles Leclerc, 23.6, and obviously a difficult car again for Charles Leclerc. The Lewis Hamilton car, driven by Charles' brother, Junior, Arthur Leclerc in the first session, so it was a bit of a washout. And then Lewis not really able to do very much in FP2 either. He finished 14th. He did a 23.9 compared with Charles' 23.6. Neither of them quick time, so it was kind of moot, really. But Ferrari continuing to be in the trouble in which we saw them in Qatar. No real incidents, no real problems for anybody, no changes to the cars at all. This is the finale. Just lots of different drivers out there doing their thing in FP1. Anyway, we'll be doing the usual vid after qualifying tomorrow. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to RSC Watchers, and to Track Ninja, and to you, the viewer. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. So it's Max Verstappen on the pole for the championship showdown for the season finale. I did say yesterday in the video how good he looked. I was a little bit concerned. I did that video quite quickly. I was a bit concerned later when I read the quotes from Max saying, the long run pace wasn't that good, the car's this, the car's that. I was thinking, really? It didn't look that way. And I think it's just Max saying that. You know, he doesn't really want to get too excited until things actually happen. Because he did look good yesterday on full run, on long runs, and in terms of the setup of the car, as I said. And they just refined it and improved it a little bit today, and the track got quicker. And I thought the best moment of qualifying actually was Q2, when Max did his run. He did 2 unbelievable laps on used softs, just saving 2 new sets, obviously, for Q3. And he was just unbelievable. He was P2. But the nerve, the amazing nerve of Red Bull and Max just to sit in the garage in the last run when everybody's out on new softs, and they predicted the cutoff point to be 22.9 and Max had done a 22.7. Okay, but things like that can go wrong, and this is a championship finale, and they just sat in the garage. I mean, Lando and Oscar were both out there. They'd done quick times as well, but they were both out on track, going around slowly, just waiting to see what might happen. Actually, not within the Delta time as it happened, but they seemed to get away with that all the time. But it did mean that the soft tyres that were on the McLarens for the first run in Q3 were a little bit scrubbed, and therefore Max did that amazing lap at the beginning of Q3 in his first run on a new set, and I think that was just like, this is serious lap time. And McLaren just couldn't get near it on the second run when they put the new softs on. And Max, unbelievably, I think, because you're on the limit, you're on the absolute limit, or he's on the absolute limit, then went quicker in every sector on his second lap. It was still the same overall lap time at 22.2, but it was quicker in every sector on the second run, which is unbelievably impressive. Normally, you don't get one sector quite right, but he just nailed it. Absolutely superb. McLaren looks like they took off a bit of wing overnight. I said yesterday that Max had a big top speed advantage over the McLarens, and that was an interesting thing. And I said, would McLaren keep that going into Saturday? And they didn't. They obviously took wing out of the car, and they've sort of halved the difference now. It was still 332, 331 to 327, 328. But it's a sort of raceable thing. But the interesting thing there is that the McLarens, to my eye, looked a little bit more skittish with that less downforce on the rear. And we saw Lando have a couple of moments. We saw Oscar have a couple of moments. And yeah, overall, in terms of it's incredible really, isn't it? To finish on a circuit like Abu Dhabi, which is a pretty good test of car performance in terms of the combination of corners, the top speed, everything there. And the Red Bull, if you saw this now as a snapshot, you've just come down from Mars, you'd see, oh yeah, that's got to be the best car in Formula One, the best efficient aerodynamic package in Formula One, very quick around the lap, very quick on the straight. So where's this car been all year? Where was it for half the year anyway? Because in reality now that Max could well have a really good race tomorrow and win the race. Oscar Piastri could probably make a very good start from the clean side of the grid. Maybe he muscles into P2, or maybe Lando lets him into P2 in the first corner. And Lando cruises around, finishes third behind Max and Oscar, and wins the World Championship, which is Red Bull having let Max down sufficient number of times with this car. And yet here they are at Abu Dhabi, with the RB21 looking like a car that has never lost a Grand Prix. It's incredible how this season has gone up and down like that, particularly from Red Bull's perspective. And there were no changes to the Red Bull between Qatar and here, between Vegas and Qatar anyway. So what is going on? It comes down, as I said several videos ago, it really comes down to the black art of getting the Pirellis in the window. And here at Abu Dhabi, as we saw yesterday, as we saw today, Red Bull are not having too much trouble getting the Pirellis to work, looking really, really good. I think one of the interesting things now that Max is on the pole and we have the two McLarens behind him, then we have George Russell in the Mercedes, then we have Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. I don't think Charles is going to be able to do much to play around with results towards the podium, assuming all things stay as they are, the status quo remains, because he's on the limit getting that lap time out of the car. And his time management was not brilliant when he was on his fuel run anyway in FP3. He didn't look like he was too focused on time management anyway. So I don't imagine he's going to be great on full tanks. But George doesn't look bad at all in the Mercedes. Remember, he's P4, but it is a Mercedes, and McLaren do have a Mercedes engine. And I wonder whether there will be any instructions for George not to get between the McLarens and Max more than he needs to, and to respect the championship, if that's the right way of phrasing it. I hope there are not, but bear in mind, if you are Mercedes, potentially, I guess, you would want to have a McLaren Mercedes as driver, as a champion, rather than a Red Bull Honda driver. Is that fair comment? Maybe not. Maybe it's not that political. Maybe Mercedes are irritated by McLaren, by this upstart customer team that's been beating them all year. But potentially, in the blue chip world of corporate car manufacturers, maybe a McLaren Mercedes victory for Lando Norris is better than a Max Verstappen victory for Red Bull Honda. Even though it's not a manufacturer's championship thing, it may be that George doesn't play a role. But knowing George, knowing how competitive he is, if he has a run at the McLarens, I'm pretty sure he'll go for it. In the same way that he semi-jokingly asked to be sent out behind Max in Q3, because for sure Max will want to give him a tow so he can be quicker than the McLarens. So we'll see. As for Lewis Hamilton in the other Ferrari, I hate to say it, it's just painful to say it now. It didn't get out of Q1 again. It was just so predictable. Ferrari ran mediums tyres at the beginning of Q1, which has looked odd. I suppose they're just getting the car sort of hot and ready on the mediums and then really getting set up. They're running two new sets of softs on Lewis's car, one new set of softs on Leclerc's car in Q1. And Charles immediately responded and got up to 5th place, no problem at all. Lewis barely could do anything. And just, again, He messed it up in the last sector, turn 12, and then he was too quick. 13, 14 ran out of road around there. But this is the 7 times world champion who went into Ferrari, in theory, hungry, and look, finishes the year not getting out of Q1. It's very sad to see. So just to recap then, Max, that brilliant 22.2, which he did twice, and he went slightly quicker, as I say, on the second lap in every sector. Lando and Oscar both did 22.4, but Lando slightly quicker in the first 2 sectors, Oscar slightly quicker in the third sector. And it was Lando that got the nod into P2, but he is on the dirty side of the grid, as I say. George Russell, P4. And Fernando Alonso, very good P6 for Aston Martin-Mercedes. Let's hope he has a decent race for a change. I keep saying that. Lance Stroll just got out of Q1 in the other Merc. Great job, too, by Gabriel Bortoleto in the Sauber Ferrari, 22.9. Esteban Ocon, 22.9. Isaac Hadjar, 23.0. Was unbelievably close. And Yuki Tsunoda got into Q3 as well, in what could well be his last ever Grand Prix. Oliver Behrman just failed to make it out of Q2. Carlos Sainz likewise, Liam Lawson, and Kimi Antonelli said the back end got away from him, qualifying P14, not getting out of Q2 as well. And the other final point to make is that McLaren, oddly, are the only team to have 2 new sets of hard tyres going into the race tomorrow and 1 set of new mediums. Everybody else has 2 new sets of mediums and 1 new set of hards. And the medium looks very good, and I suspect that's because McLaren want to be as conservative as they can in this all-important race, and they may be thinking if there's a safety car quite early on and everybody comes in, assuming they do come in for the safety car on this occasion, and they put the hards on, at least they got another new set of hards to get them through to the end of the race. A nice conservative approach. But of course, the medium is going to be quicker, and probably the quickest way to win this race is going to be an easy one-stop medium hard or maybe even medium soft combination. The other thing worth watching, I think, will be how Max runs the race, assuming he comes out of turn 1 and he's got the lead and it looks, if he's under control, he's got the race under control, is how quickly he then runs the race. Because although normally you'd want to just, whatever he normally does, 5-6 seconds over a period of time, and then eventually with the pit stops it increases to 8, 10, 12 seconds. But in this occasion, it behoves Max really to keep the field as bunched as much as possible, because the more traffic and the more debris and the more turbulence that McLaren are in theory, the more their tyres are going to go off. So what Max would like, I guess, would be for the field to be tightly bunched for at least the first 10, 15 laps on full tanks to see if he can get damage done to the McLaren tyres at that point, and then hope that potentially they might come in earlier than planned and then come out in traffic. That might be one strategy that, it's hard to strategize other teams, but that's one thing that Red Bull probably are looking at, I would imagine, in terms of how this race could be won. Not that Max has got much control over it, but that's one area where he could maybe have some sort of influence, let's put it that way. Obviously, Oscar has a different task, and there doesn't seem to be much talk about how Oscar could win the championship. But don't forget, he could still emerge from tomorrow as world champion. A lot of things would have to change, but he could, and he's still in the running. And he didn't run the car in FP1 yesterday. It was a scrappy back end to the afternoon, but he looked pretty good today, just about up to speed, a little bit ahead of where he's been recently if you take Qatar out of it. But I still think maybe he lost a fraction of momentum by missing out yesterday, and maybe that showed in his qualifying result. But having said that, all of that is on the clean side of the grid, so he's probably not complaining about that at all now. So there we are. A quick word about REC watches, which you can read about in the description below this video. You can pre-order the yet to be released but beautiful Bullet DNA watch and Datsun 240Z racer, as in John Morton, Peter Brock, early 70s, countless wins in America, watch DNA from both those cars in those watches, and you can pre-order them now. Use the code word PETER, P-E-T-R, and get an additional discount. Big thanks to REC Watches and to Jetcraft, to Track Ninja, and to OEM Exclusive. The big finale tomorrow, of course, we'll be doing a video straight after the race. I'll also be talking to Mark Slade to get the race engineer's perspective as well, so don't miss that. Take care. See you then. Well, where do we start after all that? I think we should begin by congratulating Lando, because it's been a long, long season. A lot of pressure, a lot of tension, and no surprise to see Lando, soft-hearted guy that he is, quite emotional after the race. He did what he needed to do. He finished third, very good third. I will say a very good third, run by McLaren extremely well today. Very good tyre choices, I thought, with Oscar and with Lando, and very good strategy calls, and no panic at all at any stage. The result was as predicted. I think that's the next thing to say. Max really controlled this race beautifully from the pole, never really in doubt the win of his, although McLaren on the radio tried to rev Oscar up as much as they could. Oscar finished second and Lando duly third, clinching his first World Championship. Maybe there will be more, who knows. But let's just reflect on Lando's season and his performance, because there have been ups and downs. There have been moments when he hasn't been able to hold a candle to Oscar Piastri in the same car. And yet, second half of the year, he's been very strong and very composed, really, despite mistakes along the way. And McLaren in Abu Dhabi tonight did a very clever thing, I think. I mentioned yesterday that they were the only team to have 2 new sets of hard tyres going into the race. And I suggested that was probably just being super conservative in case they wanted to run a really long race after an early safety car. Well, there were no safety car interventions at all, let alone an early one. But what they did was start Oscar on the hard tyre. Initial impressions, what are they doing? This is just going to ensure the race for Lando Norris so far as the 2 McLaren drivers are concerned. But no, the hard tyre proved to be really good. And what Oscar was able to do on that hard tyre was pass Lando around the outside of turn 9 on the opening lap, probably agreed pre-race by McLaren if Oscar was able to get right up behind Lando in the tow going down the straight on the opening lap, which he did. So Lando made it relatively easy for him to be passed on the outside. And then Oscar went away from Lando, and his job quite clearly then was to push Max as hard as he could, bearing in mind there were always going to be potential graining issues on the left-right fronts of all the cars, let alone Max's Red Bull, which, as we've said all along, all year, is not as good as a McLaren in terms of its overall aerodynamic efficiency. So there was Oscar putting pressure on Max, perhaps making Max go a little bit quicker than he wanted to go. And Lando, therefore, was able to sit back in third place and basically respond to anything that was going on behind him. Any threat from an early pit stop, in this case from George Russell, who came in relatively early. Lando immediately covered that. And then later on, he covered the pit stop of Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. So Lando was making sure no one was going to get near him for P3. Meanwhile, Oscar was taking the race to Max by being on a different tyre and possibly therefore being in a better position in terms of strategy if a safety car came out. And the hard tyre was good. It wasn't slow, and Max wasn't under real pressure. He was still managing the tyres throughout the race. He was never really extending himself until we got to the back third of the race. And I thought that was a really good strategy by McLaren, because it was semi-aggressive. It was also conservative in terms of Oscar's situation. And I think Oscar felt probably well looked after in being on a different strategy to Lando. And potentially, obviously, he always did have a chance still of winning the championship. And if nothing else, was potentially going to win the race. It all changed when Oscar came in for his very late pit stop. It was a long stint on hard tyres. He did a really good job with that. He came in from the lead, obviously, and went out on a new set of mediums with 17 laps to go, 24 seconds behind Max. And in theory, that could have been pretty close at the end. But it was at this point that Max then came alight, was just brilliant in putting in fastest lap after fastest lap, and never really allowed Oscar to even think that he had a chance of winning this race. There was rather a sad message from Oscar about 4 laps later when he said, "How quickly do I have to go to win this thing?" And they said, "Well, 1.5 seconds a lap, Oscar." There was no reply to that. 1.5 seconds out of Max Verstappen was always going to be a huge ask, even if Oscar was on new mediums and Max on used hard tyres. The gap did shrink a little bit, but it was nothing like enough to prevent Max Verstappen from winning the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, from Oscar Piastri finishing second, with the rear tyres starting to go off, which allowed Lando to close up on him and then to back away in an easy P3 behind Oscar, well clear of Charles Leclerc in P4 in the Ferrari. He drove really well in the Ferrari, bearing in mind this was a Ferrari that he was in. So Max crossed the line to lose the championship by 2 points. He got straight onto the radio to thank Honda for everything that had gone on, for the team, for the job they'd done in the second half of the year. Made a point of saying that quite correctly. And also said, I'm not disappointed. You guys shouldn't be disappointed either. So I thought that was a very nice thing for him to say. But the real body language, the body language came through, I thought, in the green room, when Max was in the middle there with Lando on his right, Oscar sort of slumping with his legs up on the left, as he would, Australia just having won the second test. and you could just tell there that Max was absolutely, well, I don't know what, he wasn't angry, he wasn't livid, but the adrenaline was pumping. He'd just driven this brilliant race, another brilliant race from the pole, and he'd lost this championship by 2 points. And he was being relatively nice to Lando. And at one point, you could tell Max was just wanted to get this whole thing over and get out of there. And he was kept looking across and saying, they're taking their time getting the podium ready. They're running late. And then Lando got up and he said something like, "You in a hurry?" Hoping that he would be. And Lando didn't respond. He said, "Lando, you in a hurry?" And Lando looked over and sort of smiled and sat down. And you could just tell that Max just wanted to get this whole thing over and get out of there and get on with 2026. And I think that said everything, really. As much as Max will say the right things, you can tell this racer and this driver of the year, in my view, in what he's done in an inferior car and what he's done so many times to get the pole and to win races when things haven't been absolutely right. And Abu Dhabi, the car was a lot better than it normally is. I've got to admit that. But even so, towards the end of the race, you've got to say the McLaren was still a better car on the hards. So great job by Max Verstappen again to win this race. And a difficult thing over a 24 race championship to sit there reflecting on why you've just lost it by 2 points if you've driven as well as he has. Simple answer to that, in my opinion. Go back to the Spanish Grand Prix when they came in with 11 laps to go behind the safety car. Safety car came out, 11 laps to go. And it was Oscar Piastri from Lando Norris from Max Verstappen. Both McLarens came in for used sets of soft tyres. Now, Max had not had as many sets of soft tyres going into the race and had used more in the race already. And so they put him on a new set of hards. Everybody else around him was on used softs, and he just got blown away. And when he got back out, he said on the radio, "Why am I on new hards?" And they said, "Oh, well, we only had one other set of softs and they weren't very good." Well, and I've always said, and I said this at the time, they should never have brought him in the first place. He should have stayed out there, got track position, and the safety car would have been out for another couple of laps. And then there would have been 10 laps around, 9 laps of Barcelona going around with, both McLarens probably would have got him. I don't think Charles Leclerc would have got him. I think he would have been P3 in the Spanish Grand Prix. He would have had track position. He could have made it difficult. Yeah, the tyres might have started to go off towards the end, but this is Max Verstappen we're talking about in a Red Bull. And of course, critics would say, well, Peter, you can't take isolated incidents like that and just say that was where he lost the championship. But that was a weekend where virtually everything was done. Max was up there in a sort of P3 position anyway. He suddenly had this safety car of giving him track position with the two McLarens coming in. He could see that in front of him. And yet he was called in at a time when they knew he didn't have any more decent sets of soft tyres. And so, yeah, I would say that was the moment. You could also say Kimi Antonelli taking him out in Austria, but that's one of the penalties you pay when you don't have a great car and you don't qualify on the front row. So that's mitigated slightly. And then, of course, you could also look back at Qatar and that mistake the same Kimi Antonelli made when he let Lando past. And if Lando had been fighting to finish second, it might have been slightly different in Abu Dhabi. Probably not. I think Oscar would probably have given the position to Lando right at the end there, or he would have passed him anyway. He would have got into DRS and got him with the rear tyres going off on Piastri's car. So, yeah, I'm not sure the Kimi thing in Qatar really added up to anything at the end of the day. So I still say it was Spain in a difficult year for Red Bull. Don't forget they lost Adrian Newey and Christian Horner, and they had a car that was kind of at the maximum of its development, and they couldn't really do much more with it, and they still managed to come up with a flaw. Anyway, here I am going on about Red Bull and Max when we should be talking about Lando. And one of the things that Lando did after his first pit stop, when he was in traffic, there was a lot of traffic there. He got through that pretty well with DRS. And then he came up behind Yuki Tsunoda, who was going actually quite well in the other Red Bull. And one wondered whether we're going to see a repeat of the Sergio Perez thing that we had in 21 when he held up Lewis without getting any sort of penalty and did a really good job of holding up Lewis quite comprehensively. Would Yuki be up for this? They sort of got on the radio and he said, yeah, I know what to do. Stay off the radio. Leave me to it. And of course, Yuki completely blew it because his way of holding him up was to weave, obviously under braking, drawing attention to the stewards, as distinct from Sergio Perez, who wasn't doing it under braking when he was holding up Lewis, and thereby forcing Lando to go off the track slightly to pass him. Full marks to Lando for knowing that he could do that there. And whether he knew from the track walk that it was okay to go there, but he certainly had done his homework. And that was for sure, for me, that was the best pass Lando made all year. And absolutely decisive. And as a result of all that, Yuki got a penalty. Not that it mattered at all, but it just showed the rather crass way he went about trying to hold up Lando Norris. It was never going to stack up. And so that backfired on them big time, I think. So again, full points to Lando in that case. But McLaren also putting Lando in that traffic, but no problem at all. He just got through it really easily and did a great job. I mean, a very, very good job by Lando Norris today. A lot of pressure on him. And, you know, he's not Max Verstappen. He's not Lewis Hamilton even at Lewis's peak. He's not Charles Leclerc. He's Lando Norris. He's a little bit scatterbrained, if that's the right word. He's a little bit sort of emotional in a charming way. He likes his golf and he likes his World Rally Championship and a lot of other stuff as well. He's a good guy. He's a great guy, and he drives really well in terms of his touch and his feel and his softness. He's not a short corner driver like Max probably never will be, and probably doesn't even understand when we mention short corners. I don't think he does. But he has been a major part of the McLaren resurgence over the last 4 or 5 years, and his DNA is in that car. In that great car, that MCL39. Rob Marshall should get a lot of credit for that as well, as should Pete Prod. And Mercedes, obviously. McLaren a customer, but Mercedes, the factory team, providing absolutely the same power. Really good. And the McLaren all over the factory Mercedes today, got to say that. And Lando just, you know, being Lando, makes mistakes periodically, and he's off the boil sometimes, but he got it together when it really mattered, and he did a great job in Abu Dhabi today. Anything could have gone wrong. He could have made a terrible start. Something could have happened. He could have locked up. He could have run wide. Anything could have happened on new tyres, whatever. But he didn't make any mistakes, and he did what he had to do, finished third. I mean, in the context of the history of the sport, will he be remembered as a great world champion? Probably not. We've had a survey on our channel for the last couple of weeks saying who's the more deserving McLaren driver to be world champion this year, and the percentages have come out in favour of Oscar Piastri. It's a relatively small margin, but nonetheless pretty convincing. It's like 4 or 5% different margin there. And in terms of 2025, we should always remember that Max scored 8 wins to the 7 of Lando and Oscar. And Max's points total of 421, not far away from Red Bull's complete total of 451. And it's a similar story with poles. Max 8 poles compared with the 7 of Lando and the 6 of Oscar. The difference, of course, was podiums. And Lando had 18 to Oscar's 16, Max 15. Bearing in mind, Lando lost that, one of them with the retirement at Zandvoort, which Max never really had a retirement like that in the race. And, of course, a disqualification in Vegas as well. So that made the difference, just the consistency of the McLaren over the Red Bull Honda. It's also worth remembering that Max won 6 of the last 9 races of the season and had 10 podium finishes in a row at the end of the year, and only 2 fastest laps in that same span, which again reflects the job Max did as distinct necessarily from the pace of the RB21 Red Bull Honda. So in the end, Max won by 13 seconds from Oscar Piastri. Very impressive drive by Max, got to say, to beat the McLarens around there. Oscar was 3 seconds ahead of Lando, who was 7 seconds ahead of Charles Leclerc, who was 7 seconds ahead of George Russell. Then came Fernando Alonso, who, probably had a pretty reasonable race by his standards, I think. And the way the disappointment has been for him in terms of how he qualifies sometimes and doesn't race, at least this time he got some points. And Esteban Ocon drove well to finish 7th for Haas-Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton worked his way up to 8th place, started on softs, went to mediums, passed quite a lot of the midfield cars, as he would. So not a bad last race of the season for Lewis. That'll give him a reasonable feel going into the winter, I think. Oliver Behrman just behind him, P9. Lance Stroll, last driver to score points, P10 in the other Aston Martin. So good day for Aston, good night for Aston. The Sauber Ferraris were 10th and 11th. They reversed order right at the end. Nico Hülkenberg, Gabriel Bortoleto, Carlos Sainz, Yuki Tsunoda got that penalty. Kimi Antonelli, nowhere all day. Alex Albon, Isaac Hadjar, Liam Lawson, the Racing Bulls, bad day for them as well. But if anybody's going to pick it up and make something of this title, it'll be Lando Norris. So let's put it into perspective. The first British driver to win the championship since Lewis, obviously, and the first McLaren driver to win it since Lewis in 2008. And let's also remember the McLaren team, which is actually started by a Kiwi called Bruce McLaren, who didn't win the World Championship, but was way ahead of his time in the races he won in the Cooper Climax's first rear-engine Formula One cars to win Grand Prix, and then engineered his own cars to win Grand Prix as well. And I'm sure Bruce right now is smiling down on Abu Dhabi and very, very happy with the way they're going, particularly as the cars, thanks to Zach Brown, are still in the correct shade of orange that Bruce was running in, certainly in 68, if not in 67, when they were maroon, actually. That'd be an interesting shift, wouldn't it? Go back to maroon for the McLarens. There'll be a lot more at which to look back as we go into the winter and how all the teams performed and how they're going to go in 2026. This was, of course, the last race for the Sauber team before they have Audi branding. And that's going to be impressive to watch. Cadillac will be joining Formula One in 2026. So there will be changes amongst the teams and the drivers, but the biggest change, of course, is going to be these 26 regulations and the new cars. And they're going to be starting to surface in sort of rendered form on the internet over the next 6 weeks or so. And then they're going to start running. And that'll be the real test of where we are, and to some extent a real test of where we are and where we're going in 2026. Probably won't really know until the first couple of races are over. But we'll be covering those with some live streams as the launches happen, and we get comments from Craig Scarborough, Mark Slade, and you, the viewer, can also have your input as well when we follow those live launches in the weeks ahead. In the meantime, we will be doing a live stream next week in which we look back at this race, this historic race in many ways, and of course the 2025 season as a whole. And with that, a big thanks to REC watchers. Don't forget that in the description below this video, you can pre-order the latest DNA watches produced by REC, and they are both gems in their own way. One is a rendition or carries the DNA from the Mustang driven by Steve McQueen in the movie Bullet, and the other is idiosyncratic, but nonetheless racers will understand it. It's part of the DNA from the Datsun 240Z, raced with such success by John Morton, run by Peter Brock in the early 70s in the United States, turning American motorsport on its head with the success of that Datsun 240Z. So those two watches can be pre-ordered, as can the Ayrton Senna 98T, which is virtually, I think, fully sold now, and other watches too. You can see that on the REC Watches website. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to Track Ninja, all of whom have supported this channel throughout the year. Thanks for watching, take care, and see you soon.